I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents.
Gerard A. Barbara.
And my father, Sean Edward Bowman Jr.
Firefighter Gary Richard Box.
Christopher Joseph Blackwell.
And my dad, Michael Batch.
We will always love you. And as you always said, Daddy, we got your back. God bless New York City, and God bless America.
I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement.
We will not fear. Even though the earth be removed, though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge.
Well, good evening, and thanks so much for joining us tonight for a special edition of Currents as we remember 9/11 10 years later. Well, it was an emotional weekend as New York, Washington, Pennsylvania, and the world commemorated the 10th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. In the Italian town of Ancona, Pope Benedict remembered the victims and their families.
Nel ricordare al Signore della vita le vittime degli attentati compiuti in quel giorno e i loro familiari, invito i responsabili delle nazioni e gli uomini di buona volontà a rifiutare sempre la violenza come soluzione dei problemi, a resistere alla tentazione dell'odio e a operare nella società ispirandosi ai principi della solidarietà, della giustizia e della pace.
The Pope was there in Ancona yesterday for the conclusion of the Italian National Eucharistic Congress. While back here in New York, commemorations also took place, of course, throughout the city, including at St. James Cathedral in downtown Brooklyn, where Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio celebrated a mass of remembrance and met with victims' families.
We have come together today to celebrate this Eucharist and to pray for the innocent souls who suffered death on September 11, 2001. We commend them to God's mercy. But we are never closer to our faithful departed than when we celebrate the Eucharist.
Today we're here to commemorate 9/11, the 10th anniversary of the tragedy that occurred at the World Trade Center. So we're here in prayer and commemoration.
It's better to share grief, it's better to share sorrow, because then we find comfort and we find support from others insofar as we are able to do this together. Yeah.
I mean, we lost a lot of people. I mean, I know I lost an extended family member, Nicky Rasamundo, and I think of him often, and I don't know, it's just a different perspective on life. I think can't take anything for granted, I guess.
Forgiveness frees us and allows us to obtain forgiveness. The teaching of forgiveness is about being like God Himself, the one who is all merciful. How difficult it is for us to imitate God, especially when it comes to unconditional forgiveness.
One way of forgiving others who've done something like this is simply to ask for God's mercy on all of us. You know, somehow God have mercy on all of us, including them, even though it's very difficult for us to actually forgive, but just say, Lord, have mercy on all of us.
We remember not to be stuck in the past, but to give us a vision of the future, a vision that tells us we must live in peace with all people, that we've got to work for a world of peace and justice, that we've got to look to the future with hope, because as Christians we never give up hope, no matter how bad the situation is. This was a terrible tragedy that made us think about many, many things, and today we remember all of those things and more.
There must be a time for hope. We need to turn to God and to one another in Christian hope. Hope assures us that no matter what challenges life brings us, Our hope is founded on the Lord God who sustains us in every moment and in every circumstance.
Those who died are close to us, especially when we celebrate the Eucharist. So if people have some comfort, some consolation, some hope because of that, that eventually we'll all be reunited in the heavenly banquet, the Eucharist without end.
We can never forget, but we must use our memory to bring us forward because we are Christians. We are people of hope, and hope always looks forward to the future.
And we will have much more on the 10th anniversary of 9/11 throughout the show. When we return, clergy take matters into their own hands for a vigil at Ground Zero. We'll have that in the rest of the day's headlines coming up next. But first, did 9/11 change your life? That's the question we asked Catholics here in Brooklyn 10 years later, and here's what they had to say.
It made me realize how powerless I am over everything. It made me calmer because of that.
In the midst of such great tragedy, that people still believe in something that's bigger than the tragedy that happened.
I used to take a lot for granted, and now I watch and I look more at things happening around me.
Well, it changes your perspective about how important life is and how things could change, in a snap, and you're not aware of the things that are important.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, a 9/11 memorial unlike any other. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, the U.S. Bishops' Conference says the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks is a time to put aside differences. In a statement, Bishops' Conference President Archbishop Timothy Dolan remembered the victims and said the greatest resource we have in these struggles is faith. Dolan said bishops are resolved to reject terrorism and hatred. Archbishop Dolan also spoke yesterday at a special interfaith service at St. Paul's Chapel in Lower Manhattan. He and other clergy were not invited to the memorial service at Ground Zero, but a group of clergy took matters into their own hands this weekend with a Saturday vigil.
We're here to have the only public prayer service at Ground Zero. Tragically, Mayor Bloomberg, in the official 9/11 service tomorrow, has chosen to ban all public expressions of faith, all prayer, all clergy.
The mayor has said at first that there was not enough time, but I say we make time for what really matters. We allow the politicians to speak. Why they get more of a say than the clergy.
We're not doing this in anger. We're doing it because God is our most important audience. And we want to speak to him publicly, as we have in so many important occasions in our country's history.
While the holes in the ground left by the collapse of the trade towers are no longer there, without prayer, without an acknowledgement of God and the solace that he provides to us, there's another hole here, and it's a hole in the heart and a hole in the soul. And we hope through our prayer pilgrimage that maybe we can help to fill a little bit of that hole.
It's not about a religion or any particular religion. If people want to pray and this is how they feel peace or how they show their respect, then they should be allowed to pray or speak or anything.
I just thank God that there were firemen and police officers and rescue people that came and they sacrificed, and I think we need to thank God for that, and we need to ask him for direction.
For all the other elected officials, oh God, we ask you that they will look to you for the answers that are only found in your presence, oh God.
Amen.
Well, Vatican Ambassador Miguel Diaz has also reflected on the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Rome Reports caught up with him.
It was the day that changed the world, September 11, 2001. It made interreligious dialogue a priority. For some, it's still a challenge, but progress has been made.
The effort to bridge those differences, especially when it comes to religion. We must never allow God and religion to be used as a force for destruction.
Miguel Diaz is the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. He says since the attacks of September 11th, several organizations, embassies, and the Vatican have made an effort to increase not only interreligious dialogue, but international communication in general. On that deadly morning, nearly 3,000 people lost their lives, but the impact had no number or borders.
The city of New York was a microcosm of the world community. And the pain in New York was a pain that was shared across the world.
Diaz says it's a time to honor the victims, but also a time to reflect on the progress made in interreligious dialogue, as well as its challenges.
Well, in other news, an academic powerhouse in Queens is looking to upgrade its athletic program. The all-girls Mary Louis Academy in Jamaica Estates is requesting a zoning exception to allow it to build a new state-of-the-art sports complex. The facility would include a basketball court, locker rooms, dance rooms, as well as rooms for yoga and Pilates, along with office space. The school says it needs the larger space for its more than 30 sports teams and 950 students. A man is behind bars in New Jersey charged with vandalism at 6 Catholic parishes. In the incidents, which happened in South Jersey in July, religious statues were either knocked over or hit with an object. The 41-year-old man has been charged with 9 counts of criminal mischief and bias intimidation. Well, meantime, some Greek Orthodox nuns in Washington state saw a forest fire heading toward their home, so they sprang into action. Laura Rios has more.
This image captures the valiant effort of the Sisters of St. John's Monastery as they tried to stop what eventually became the monastery complex fire. It was a regular Wednesday at their bakery when flames suddenly shot up across the highway. The sisters grabbed hoses and buckets of water, doing their best to put out the flames while they waited for firefighters to arrive.
Well, it was just like a little brush fire about a foot high, and so we started wetting it, but then it just was out of control, and then the big pine trees started.
Meanwhile, another spot fire was burning down the road toward their cemetery and dormitory.
And we're just, praying and waiting and watching, and then these trees right behind this building shot up, and that's when they told us we had to evacuate.
The sisters spent an anxious night, worried they would lose it all.
And we could see the fire, from, way across the hill. There's a big valley, we could see it, and we just thought, that's our monastery.
They had no idea what they'd find when they returned. On Thursday morning, they saw the trees around the property were charred and the ground still smoking, but the monastery and dormitory were still standing. The flames burned right up to the small cemetery, but the graves and wooden crosses were spared.
We were very thankful to see everything still standing. The firemen did an awesome job protecting all the buildings around here.
The sisters now feel a mix of emotions, grateful their home was saved, sad the fire has destroyed so many other buildings, and a bit bewildered by the attention this photo has brought them.
Everybody's like, wow, what a great job the sisters did, but we're like, well, if you had a fire across the street, what would you do?
That report from Laura Rios. Well, Mel Gibson is set to produce another religious epic, this time about a Jewish icon. Gibson will reportedly produce a film about Judah Maccabee, the famed Jewish warrior who, along with his father and 4 brothers, led a revolt against the Greek-Syrian army. Gibson has faced charges of anti-Semitism for his portrayal of Jews in his 2004 epic, The Passion of the Christ. In 2006, Gibson made anti-Semitic remarks to a police officer after being pulled over for speeding with an open container of alcohol. And postcards, prayer cards, and stuffed animals? Yeah, a German company has created a teddy bear to commemorate the Pope Benedict's upcoming trip later on this month to his home country. Only 111 of the teddy bears will be produced at a cost of $313 a piece. $313, that is one expensive teddy bear. Well, stay with us. There is much more currents ahead. When we come back, commemorating firefighters and their families 10 years after 9/11. But first, is America safer in 2011? We asked Brooklyn Catholics for their thoughts.
I don't think so. Until America becomes more peaceful herself, it's never going to be safer.
I would like to think so. The way they have increased the security has made me feel more safer.
As long as there's still hatred in the world and still conflict, we'll never be safe in this world.
We have a very good security system, but safer, it is a bit more, but there is more to be done.
I think it is. I mean, there's a lot of, the NYPD are doing a great job in protecting the city, and I think people are definitely, on guard.
Welcome back. Well, of the close to 3,000 people who died in the September 11th terrorist attacks, more than 400 were first responders, an overwhelming number of them New York City firefighters. In just a couple of weeks, St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, which is run by an Episcopal congregation from Manhattan's Upper West Side, will dedicate a monument to the 343 firefighters who perished. It's part of the cemetery's annual service honoring firefighters and city and Port Authority police officers who died on 9/11, along with their families. And one man who knows what many of these families have gone through is Monsignor John Delendick. He's an FDNY chaplain, and he's here with me in the studio now. Monsignor, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here.
Of course, this is a difficult time, I'm sure, any time the month of September rolls around for any New York City firefighter. How are they, in general, and of course it varies obviously from person to person, but how do the guys look back now, 10 years later, and deal with still the emotion of that day?
What I think we have to look at is really two groups of firefighters that are dealing with it. Okay, the majority of firefighters right now didn't come on the job till after the Trade Center. So many of the guys have retired who were there at the time. So very few of them are still left in the firehouses, still some around.
Yeah.
On September 11th and the day before, when we had our celebration St. Patrick's, they were very busy dealing with the families. They usually worry about the families more than they worry about themselves.
It's a very. I was watching actually some specials over the weekend and things. I mean, of course, TV coverage was great. This being the 10th anniversary, there was more than there has been in years past, and was watching the coverage of the Memorial Museum. And they were, getting that ready for next year. I think the museum's actually going to open. And it was Ladder 3, I think, was the Big Red. They were lowering it down into the museum and just seeing it.
I blessed that when they lowered it.
Oh yeah,
I was there. Yeah.
I probably saw you on the TV screen there. The camaraderie of these guys is something that's absolutely amazing. The ones who were serving then and the ones who I guess even now serve. Spiritually, how is your job affected by 9/11 just day in and day out?
It varies. Obviously, right after 9/11, it was a very tough time because we were constantly going to memorials and funerals, sometimes 3 a day. And we were doing that 5, sometimes six days a week. So that was very, very difficult time. Yeah. But we have a new problem now, too. We have all these guys who are dying from diseases from the Trade Center. We are up to, as of the other day, 57 people, firefighters, who died from the effects of the Trade Center. So Trade Center is still claiming victims. So we're still seeing new widows and new families and still comforting firefighters, especially firefighters who don't know if they're going to be the next ones, because this doesn't always appear right away.
Yeah.
We may be having hundreds more people dying because of this. The big difference here, too, is the families are suffering now with them. It wasn't like 9/11 where they died instantly.
Right. And
difficulty was they had to wait for news to find out. Here, they're actually sitting with them and, in a sense, suffering with them. That's what makes it very difficult.
Right. And that's a part of this whole story, for lack of a better word, that people don't often think about. Is that there's still not only the emotional suffering that continues today, but physical suffering as well from people who were there and who worked on top of the pile for so long. When firefighters now and the public, as of the families as of yesterday and the public as of today, they now have a place to go to remember those who had passed on September 11th.
I will tell you, there is one that has all the first responders on it already.
Yeah.
In Coney Island.
Yes,
it's on the wall, and that was the first one that was up, and we have families that go there all the time. You know, in fact, there's amazing that we have different celebrations there. We have Palm Sunday Mass. Bishop Caggiano was there last time. Bishop Daly had done it a few times. Last night, someone called me, a firefighter, and said, "You know, there's a storefront church group here having some celebration at the wall." I said, "That's good."
Yeah.
They know it's a sacred place, you know.
Exactly.
But we already have one, and it was interesting to see that. I didn't know that.
We'll see. There you go. And even where where I'm from in Georgia, I'm from Georgia originally. You know, there are memorials even in small towns. I'll be driving through small towns in Georgia, and there'll be memorials to 9/11 and to the victims there. And from my hometown, we actually had a woman who died in the Pentagon. So it's interesting to see how far-reaching this tragedy is as well. And of course, no one has been hit harder by this than the New York City Fire Department, really, and the police, and of course all the families of the workers and everything there in the World Trade Center. So of course they continue to be in our thoughts and prayers, and we thank you so much, Monsignor, for your work and for being here. We really appreciate it very much. Thanks. Okay. Well, stay with us. There is much more Currents coming up. When we return, United in Memory, a unique memorial for 9/11 victims, makes its way across the country. Well, first, what are the lessons of September 11th? Catholics in Brooklyn shared their thoughts with us.
I think the lesson should be to appreciate the smaller things in everyday life and to be good to our neighbor.
I think it woke up a lot of people that were half asleep, you might say, and it made us more aware of the situation.
We are a good people, that we are people with a caring heart, and we've seen that in 9/11, and we really have to kind of live up to that in our everyday lives, trying to be the change that we want to see in the world, rather than just complaining and cursing the evil that's out there.
Well, I think we've learned that there's a new normal and that we have to be vigilant all the time, and we can't indiscriminately trust everyone.
Finally tonight, there is the 9/11 Memorial and Museum at Ground Zero, the Wall of Remembrance at MCU Park in Coney Island, and soon a new memorial for firefighters in Queens. And then there's the 9/11 Quilt. More than 1,500 feet long, it honors each of the victims of the attacks on September 11th. For the past 3 days, it's been on display at St. John's University in Staten Island. We had a chance to check it out for ourselves and learn much more about it.
I wanted to do something that would not only memorialize the people that got killed, but that also would bring comfort to the families. And a lot of people ask me why a quilt. And my same response to everybody is, what's another word for a quilt? A comforter. It was a few weeks after 9/11 that Peter and I came to New York. I had to see Ground Zero in person just to accept the fact that it really happened.
He wanted to create something so that people wouldn't forget what happened, but more so that people wouldn't forget the people that died that day. And so he came up with this idea to create the quilt.
I started expressing my idea of the quilt to my friends and family, and they all said that it's impossible. This is a task that cannot be done, which only made me more determined, and I worked harder to do it.
Turns out quilters from all over the world were looking for something to do. So what we had them do was, create a memorial block for someone that died that day. We had a list of all the victims that died. We got another group of volunteers to actually sew it together. There was about 300 ladies that met every Saturday. We would all just go to work and work, sewing, tying the little knots that you see on each quilt. Those were all hand-tied.
Less than 11 months later, we had the quilt completed and was on display for the first time, for the first anniversary. So it was less than a year.
This is the 28th show since 2002. I forget how many cities we've been to anymore.
All funded by people who come to see it.
Everybody talks about, almost 3,000 were killed, almost 3,000, and they just make it sound like a number. You look at these quilt patches, you see that some of them were fishermen, some of them were Met fans, some of them were Yankee fans. I'm from St. Clair's Parish here on Staten Island. It's in Great Kills. and we lost 29 parishioners. Our organization is called Where to Turn, and we began as the St. Clair's World Trade Center Outreach Group. Corey Gamble, who created this quilt with Peter Marquez, contacted me. So for the 5th anniversary of 9/11, we had it here at St. John's.
The end goal is to educate everybody, educate them about the lives of the people who were lost on that infamous day of 9/11.
For most of the year now, this quilt is packed away in a storage unit. I committed that I would try to find a place where we could permanently locate the quilt. And we found a location up here on Staten Island. We're also going to have a corridor of memories, and that's going to surround a 25,000 square foot memorial garden. So it's really a place for peaceful reflection, and the centerpiece will be the quilt.
And make sure that no one will actually forget, you know, the individuals who passed away and their legacies. My name is Nick Giordano. I'm the son of Jeff Giordano, and he lost his life in the line of duty as a firefighter in the 9/11 tragedy. He was a hero whenever somebody needed him. He'd be there if somebody was in trouble or scared. He'd be there in a heartbeat. He always put others before himself. All the memorials of 9/11 mean a lot to me because it means that this tragedy will never be forgotten.
I used to just walk through the rows and look, just reading the blocks, and it always, you know, brought tears to my eyes, and it always made me remember why we did it.
This quilt does exactly what it was intended to do, bringing comfort to the families.
These memories are what help keep me going every time this date passes around. You get to pass on these great tales of these heroic men, so I mean, it means a lot that these memorials are here.
And also should note that the quilt will be on permanent display on Staten Island. That was brought to my attention a little bit earlier. It's going to be on permanent display on Staten Island, so we'll give you more information about that when we know exactly where it's going to be and when. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents. Now, coming up tomorrow, parishes in Brooklyn and Queens remember 9/11. We'll take you to 2 different commemorations. Until then, though, be sure and visit us online over at currentsny.net. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. We leave you now with the scene at Ground Zero 3 years ago when Pope Benedict paid his respects at this sacred ground. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.
God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world. Peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of the earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Grant that those whose lives were spared may live that the lives lost here may not have been lost in vain. Comfort and console us, strengthen us in hope, and give us the wisdom and courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among nations and in the hearts of all.